Do you want to add anything about the Internet?
Yeah, I'd like to see the chat room concept develop more. I'd like to see across the boundaries of language, for example, some facility set up so you can go on a chat room and there will be a translator who will translate the comments of each person so that multi-language conferees can actually understand each other. We've been talking thus far about how we are going to use systems and so on, and I believe that one of the systems has got to be the Internet.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ecuador. It is from MR y Compañía Consultores in the city of Manta in Ecuador.
Greetings to all of our friends who are, we are here from the Central Bank in Manta. Our question is the following. No, la conexión. There is a unification, standardization between the developed countries in order to take advantage or to process the work applications of coming from immigrants. Is that a reality? Do we actually have those mechanisms in place? Standardization, ways of standard ways to process job applications, work applications for immigrants or from immigrants?
Being Australian, we'd like you to comment on U.S. immigration law.
Yeah, or those who are reading the news might like to comment on Australian immigration. We're having our own problems at the moment with people seeking to enter our country. The answer is we clearly don't have any standardization at the moment for a whole multiplicity of reasons. But as I hope I said in my presentation, one of the things that concerns me about many of these trends is the trend towards standardization, which does of necessity mean a reduction in diversity. And the world at the moment is an incredibly rich place, and it would seem to me to be a great pity if in an attempt to make it easier for people to communicate with each other, we lose some of that richness. So some forms of standardization, it seemed to me, are entirely appropriate, and we ought to make it easier, for example, for people to connect technologically. But it seems to me some of the more human forms of communication, such as, for example, dealing with job applications, it wouldn't bother me particularly if there were some apparent inefficiencies in that process in order to allow for some of the rich diversity that happens at local levels to be maintained.
Thank you for your questions. Let's now move to the second module of our program, in which we will explore in more detail how we as organizations and as individuals can prepare ourselves to successfully ensure successful recruitment of key skills and talents.
Thank you. I'd like to summarize what we have learned or relearned thus far in this telecast. 1, we are living in a global economy. That economy is characterized by global migration of capital and trade and products across national borders. If this migration sometimes makes governments, lawmakers, and business owners nervous, that is nothing compared to their reaction to another migration across national borders, namely that of people. These migrants are called by many names, sometimes simply people, sometimes immigrants, and sometimes workers, men and women who need or will need jobs in the new land they have chosen. 2, in one sense, this migration of people is a relatively small problem. It currently involves less than 2.5% of the world's population. 3, but in another sense, it is a big problem, or is going to be a big problem in the years ahead, inasmuch as the migration numbers are increasing dramatically year by year. And migrations are not equally distributed around the world, or even within one country. Certain places are inundated with migrants, while others are not. 4, the first instinct of a nation which becomes aware of this problem is to try to make it more difficult for the would-be workers to enter their country through such devices as tougher immigration laws. Fearful nations bemoan not only the potential loss of jobs to these immigrants, they bemoan as well the dilution or destruction of a cultural heritage, which they hold to be critical to diversity and the survival of the species. 5, the alternative instinct of more enlightened nations, at least, is to welcome the new workers, especially those who offer highly skilled and needed talents to their workplace, and bring cultural diversity that enriches a nation. 6, given this global economy, there's a great need for nations to revise their educational systems so that they better prepare people for living and working in other countries than their own. Schools need to more heavily emphasize teaching their students how to think and how to get and use the information they need throughout their lives. And now on with our story. Immigrants who are allowed to enter a new country still face daunting problems with respect to finding a job. They do not come to a land where everyone is employed but them. They come to a country already filled with competitors, that is, lots of other people looking for work as they are. In the U.S., for example, over 900,000 U.S. job hunters abandoned their search for a job last month, convinced that there, quote, are no jobs out there. And these are natives who have often held jobs in the U.S. for 10 or 20 years, with lots of contacts and know-how about the U.S. scene. As these give up month after month, new immigrants arrive with high hopes, but without the contacts, without the know-how, and without the years of experience in the U.S. job market. Typically, with these handicaps, they very swiftly join this pool of 900,000 discouraged job seekers who have concluded, quote, there are no jobs out there, unquote. As in the U.S., so in other countries as well. At this point, it dawns on us that the global economy requires a new kind of education. Education about the job hunt itself. What are its laws? What are its problems, and how we can overcome those problems? Migrating workers are not born knowing this. They need to be told what's wrong with traditional methods of job hunting, and, to use a gambling metaphor, how the dice are loaded against them, and how to get around all that. My friend John Naisbitt, author of the classic book Megatrends, says that some countries or places are bellwethers, places where new ideas or new trends first appear, from which other nations and places can learn down the line. In the matter of the job hunt, the U.S. is the bellwether. The nature of the job hunt has been more studied, more surveyed, more analyzed there than in any other nation on earth. And, good news, the analysis has been found to be applicable not only to the U.S., but to many nations and cultures around the world. As I said, a global economy demands that we all familiarize ourselves with this research, and demands that we allow job hunters, both immigrants and non-immigrants, access to this information as a natural part of their lifelong education, timely at any time, but never more so than when they are actively looking for work. Global migration without more education concerning the nature of the job hunt is doomed to pile up problem upon problem, like a multiple car pileup on a major traffic artery. Typically, in the U.S. and elsewhere, this sort of information is not presented in either secondary schools or universities. It is presented by individual career counselors or coaches in offices funded privately or publicly on a day-by-day or weekly basis. This new educational model, teach me as much as you can about the nature of the job hunt, is called job hunting programs, or, more elegantly, career management systems. Career management systems taught preferably to active job hunters may include lectures, group discussion, shared experiences over many weeks, private counseling, mock interviews, and so on. They exist around the world and are constantly growing in number. These career management systems, in the thousands, have been heavily influenced in their design and program by a U.S. book. Its title in English is What Color is Your Parachute? A practical manual for job hunters and career changers. It summarizes chapter by chapter all that we know today about the job hunt. With over 7 million copies in use thus far and revised annually, it has shaped career classes or career management systems in country after country around the world. It has been translated into 12 languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, and English. Of course, in one of the ironies of publishing, the current Spanish translation is out of date, out of print, and as we owners of a car say, in the shop for repairs. It should be reissued later this year. As I am the author of that book, I have been asked today to outline briefly for you what the key career management ideas are that are so needed if migrating workers are to be successful in finding a job in their new chosen land. There are 7 key ideas. 1, there are always jobs out there, maybe not in the immediate vicinity of where you live, but somewhere in every city or town in the U.S. and elsewhere around the world. Organizations are born, organizations expand, workers become restless, quit, change jobs, move, become ill long-term, or become handicapped, retire, or die. There are always jobs somewhere out there waiting to be filled. Second, the fact that you can't find those jobs only means the vacancy hasn't been advertised, or you are not using the right method to find it. Most people who can't find a job assume there is only one way to look for the jobs that are out there: agencies, ads, and resumes. They assume that if they hunt for jobs this way and can't turn up anything, there must not be any jobs out there. This is a false assumption, as I can easily illustrate with a story from outside the job world. I had a friend once who moved to another U.S. city. We lost touch with each other. But 2 years later, I found myself in that city, and I decided to look him up. How to find him? Well, I assumed everyone in the U.S. had a telephone. So I looked him up in the phone book. No listing. I thought maybe he had an unlisted number, so I called information and asked. Nope, not even an unlisted number. Consequently, I gave up. I concluded he had moved on to yet another city. It turned out I was wrong. He was still in that city. He just didn't happen to have a telephone. My problem? I had adopted the wrong strategy for finding him. I assumed everyone would have a telephone. Wrong. In the U.S., only 94% of all households have telephones. The other 6% don't. He was among that 6%. I eventually found my friend. I contacted his former church, found friends of his there who knew exactly where he had moved to in this new city. Hunting for my old friend was easy when I used the right strategy, and from difficult to next to impossible when I used the wrong strategy. And the moral of this tale? A tight job market isn't the biggest problem you face as a job hunter. More often than not, your search strategy is the problem. Third, you must always be ready to change your strategy. There are only so many jobs you can find using any one particular job hunting strategy, such as job boards or agencies or advertisements in a newspaper. When that strategy doesn't work and you're coming up empty, you need to change the search method you've been using. Fourth, before you use any job hunting strategy, know the odds of that particular strategy. That way, if you know ahead of time that the odds are really bad, and subsequently you find out the method doesn't work for you, you won't take it so personally. According to U.S. studies at least, here are the 5 worst ways to look for the jobs that are out there. The first is mailing out or posting your resume. This search method has been found to have about a 93% failure rate. That is, out of every 100 job hunters who use this search method, 7 will find a job thereby. 93 job hunters out of 100 will not find the jobs that are out there if they use only this method to search for them. And by the way, I'm being generous here with my percentage. One study showed that outside the internet, only 1 out of 1,470 resumes actually resulted in a job. In other words, here, resumes had a 99.94% failure rate. Another study put the figure even higher. 1 job offer for every 1,700 resumes floating around out there. If all of these figures still seem like good odds to you, here's a way to put them into perspective. Would you take an airplane if you knew that only 1 out of 1,700 got through to its destination? We must always remind job hunters before you use any job hunting method Know the odds. That way, if you know ahead of time that the odds are really bad, as here with resumes, and subsequently you find out the method doesn't work for you, you won't take it so personally. The worst thing that can happen during your job hunt is to lose your self-esteem. The other 4 worst ways to look for those jobs that are out there are answering ads in professional or trade journals appropriate to your field, 92% failure rate. Searching on the internet, 90% failure rate. Answering local newspaper ads, 76 to 95% failure rate, depending on the level of salary being sought. And going to private employment agencies or search firms for help, 72 to 95% failure rate. Again, depending on the level of salary being sought. Now, what does research reveal as the 5 best ways to try to find a job? Well, listed in order from lowest success rate to best, they turn out to be asking for job leads from family members, friends, people in the community, staff at career centers, especially at the local community college or the high school or local college. You ask them one simple question. Do you know of any jobs at the place where you work or elsewhere? This search method has a 67% failure rate. This is one of the 5 best ways to look for a job, but it should be noted no method works all the time and for everybody. 67 job hunters out of 100 will still not find the jobs that are out there, even if they use this method to search for them. The other 4 best ways to look for a job are knocking on the door of any employer, factory, or office that interests you, whether or not they are known to have a vacancy. This is a 53% failure rate. By yourself, using your local phone book's yellow pages to identify subjects or fields of interest to you in the town or city where you now live, and then calling up the employers listed in that field to ask if they are hiring for the type of position you can do and do well. 31% failure rate. Again, this is one of the 5 best ways to look for a job, but it should be noted, as I have said, that no job hunting method is bulletproof. No method works all the time and for everybody. Next, in a group with other job hunters, using the phone book's yellow pages to identify subjects or fields of interest to you in the town or city where you are, and then calling up the employers listed in that field to ask if they are hiring for the type of position you can do and do well. This method has only a 16% failure rate. And finally, the very best way to look for a job is to do an inventory on yourself, know exactly what are the skills you have to offer, and then approaching organizations that interest you, whether or not they are known to have a vacancy, and asking to talk to the person who has the power to hire you for the position you are interested in. This method has an 86% success rate. That is, out of every 100 job hunters or career changes who use this search method, 86 will find a job or a new career thereby. It should be noted that this method's success rate is 12 times higher than the success rate for resumes. But it should also be noted that no job hunting method is bulletproof. No method works all the time and for everybody. 14 job hunters out of 100 will still not find the jobs that are out there, even if they use this method to search for them. Fifth key idea: it is best to approach small companies or small organizations with 20 or less employees in your job hunt. This is where, in any land, the most job opportunities are to be found. Sixth key idea: if you have a handicap or anything that might be regarded as a handicap, you must realize that there are two kinds of employers out there: those who will be bothered by your handicap and those who won't, as long as you can do the job. You politely thank the first kind of employer for their courtesy in seeing you. Ask them if they know anyone else who might be interested in your skills, and then politely take your leave. Keep going until you find the second kind of employer. And lastly, the important truth we must teach about the job hunt is that diligence and persistence are required. The job hunt often takes 18 weeks or longer, and migrating workers must devote to their job hunt at least 5 hours each day. Well, those are the 7 important ideas we must teach migrating workers in this global economy. Now, if we can get these ideas across, will it really make any difference to migrating workers from another country? Will they really be any more successful at their job hunt in their new country? Or will they still find the dice are loaded against them? All the research indicates that knowing more about the job hunt makes a huge difference to migrating workers. For example, here are 2 letters which I received from immigrants who had access to good career management learnings, in this case directly from a book, my book. The first letter is from a man who migrated from South Africa to New Zealand. He wrote, "I have just come through a job hunting escapade. New field, career, country, culture, the works. I resigned from the South African Navy and moved my family across the world to New Zealand. Being in the Navy all my working life, 18 years, I decided to move into the field of business management in New Zealand. I tried out all the normal avenues, the ads in newspapers. I applied to over 80 of these. Employers' ads on the internet. I applied to over 50 of these. And agencies. I signed up with 5 of these without an iota of success or feedback. I then found your book, and voila, I'm employed. I managed to find the exact job I wanted by following your book's advice in only 55 days since landing in New Zealand. I am smiling and purring like a Cheshire cat." The second letter is from a woman who migrated from China to the U.S. "Before I read this book," she said, "I was depressed and lost in the futile job hunt, using want ads only. I did not receive even one phone call from any ad I answered over a total of 4 months. I felt I was the most useless person on earth. I am female, with a 2.5-year-old daughter, former professor in China, with no working experience at all in the U.S. We came here 7 months ago because my husband had a job offer here. Then on June 11th of last year, I saw your book in a local bookstore. Subsequently, I spent 3 weeks, 10 hours a day, except Sunday, reading every single word of your book and doing all the paper and pencil inventories about myself that are in the book. After getting to know myself much better, I felt I was ready to try the job hunt again. I used Parachute throughout as my guide from the very beginning to the very end, namely salary negotiation. In just 2 weeks, I secured, you guessed it, 2 job offers, one of which I am taking, as it is an excellent job with very good pay. It is, you guessed it again, a small company with 20 or so employees. It is also a career change. I was a professor of English, now I am to be a controller. So, what have we learned from these 2 letters and others? Migrations of workers will continue and increase. Many of those workers are destined to find their new land a cold land, so far as finding employment is concerned. But there's something each of us can do about that. We can put learning more about the job hunt at the top of our priority list. The global workplace needs more and more for us to be masters of the job hunt. Once we've done that, we need to create career management courses, privately funded job centers, and university classes where we can find ways to teach and share these learnings with others, particularly those caught up in the global migration of parts of the labor force.